Oftentimes, when we go see a film based on a book, we walk away and we say, hey, the book was better. And that seems to be the general consensus. We read a book, we go see the movie, and we think, oh, wow, the book was definitely better. Like maybe even if you liked the movie, you might still think that the book was better. And that seems to be the case mostly. However, every once in a while, you come across a book, you read it, and you go see the movie, and you think, wow, the movie was way better.
'Cause I've been living life right like I could just die any minute. Going for a ride down the side.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jacob Berry. Welcome to the StudioJake vidcast, where I talk about all things pop culture. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and if you're watching on YouTube, ring that little bell so you get notifications when I post a new vidcast, and consider becoming a channel member. As both a reader and a moviegoer, I often kind of go to that default position where I think the book was better. Lord of the Rings is a great example. I love the Peter Jackson trilogy. I think it's fantastic. I think it's good, but it cannot even get close to eclipsing the Lord of the Rings, the masterpiece that J.R. Tolkien made it. And that's just one example. I could give several others. However, I have come across some times where that's not the case. The film just is better. And listen, this is all in my humble opinion. By any stretch, feel free to disagree with me in the comments. In fact, I welcome it. I just wanted to give these 5 films that are actually better than their book adaptations. And I know other YouTubers have done this. I just wanted to put my 2 cents in. Okay, so up first we have The Prestige, and the book is by Christopher Priest. And basically, it is two descendants in, at the time when the book came out, modern day America, who discovered the diaries of two ancestors that they have who were both stage magicians during Victorian London. And these two developed an intense rivalry with each other. They started competing very fiercely, and it kind of leads into sort of the sci fi crisis where one of the magicians, who's called the Great Danton, I think, his body gets separated from his soul. It's a very weird thing that happens by a machine that he got from none other than Nikola Tesla. I read the book and it wasn't terrible. Christopher Priest, I'm not really familiar with his other works, but I did read The Prestige and I thought it was okay. I thought that sometimes the rivalry got a little cartoonish at times, but it does have a lot of tragedy, a lot of heart, and it's interesting to read how sort of the descendants are reading back on this rivalry that their ancestors had with each other. Fast forward, the great Christopher Nolan, who is my all time favorite active filmmaker, he decides to adapt the novel, and of course, it stars Michael Caine, it stars Hugh Jackman as the Great Danton, it stars Christian Bale as his rival, and it goes really intense. Now, what Christopher Nolan did was he just eliminated the modern day aspect of it, and it just focuses on the intensifying rivalry between these two Victorian age magicians. And I have to say, I think that the movie is better. I think eliminating the modern day aspect of it and just focusing on the Victorian era guys, it worked out great. We get to see all kinds of rivalries, we get to see heartbreak, we see tragedy, and ultimately it leads to a conclusion that you do not expect. Of course, it being Christopher Nolan, it still follows 3 different timelines, but without the modern day one, I think it syncs up a little better because it's a guy who is reading his rival's journal while he's in prison, and then it follows his memories. So he'll like read something, the movie will show it, but then it'll flash back to his perspective of what happened. And I found it very enthralling. It was very interesting. It came out around the same time as a similar movie called The Illusionist. However, The Prestige is much better in its approach to the story, and I just found it way more entertaining and way more interesting. And up next, we have Paranoia by Joseph Finder. Now, Joseph Finder is an excellent novelist, and there's no shade at his talent here. He writes a book, and it's about a young man who he's a software engineer at this big sort of big tech corporation. And what happens is he hacks into his company's network because a friend of his is about to retire. But instead of giving him sort of just a basic send off, he actually through the hacking has the guy be sent off in like this epic retirement party. It just goes out of control. It's a 5-star restaurant and everything in between. So his boss basically says, hey, I'm going to sue you for fraud. I'm going to turn you over to the authorities unless you go and you spy on my rival's project, which is called in the book Aurora. He agrees to do this, and also he's dealing with his father, who is very ill. He's trying to find him a nurse. Unfortunately, his father is very ornery. If he gets a female nurse, he kind of harasses them. If he gets a male nurse, the male nurse he just berates, and so then he actually ends up hiring a nurse who went to prison because he knows that this guy can handle his father's bad attitude. The book, it gets adapted by director Robert Lukatek. Now, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Let me know in the comments section below. And he kind of changes the story a little bit. So there's a female side character in the novel, and she's kind of part of the plot with the first boss who's blackmailing the main character. In the movie, she's not at all involved. It just knows him. It's a mutual acquaintance sort of situation. But in this case, what happens is he and his team are developing a project. They fail to impress their boss, who's played by Gary Oldman. Well, he takes his company credit card and then he just blows it all and racks up something, I think they said like something like $20,000 in debt. So the boss, again played by Gary Oldman, he basically makes him the same deal. He says, I'm going to have you arrested for fraud and theft and everything in between unless you go and be a corporate spy and my rival. Now, in the movie, they make it where the rival company or the rival CEO, who's played by Harrison Ford, is his former mentor. So they have like this, not just sort of a Bill Gates, Steve Jobs sort of rivalry between them. They actually have like a personal rivalry. So our protagonist, he goes and does this. And in the movie, the project is called Aura instead of Aurora because Disney copyrighted the term Aurora, which is very stupid. Our trademark laws are insane. But anyway, it ends up where there's a lot of twists and turns there. And also they really tone down how obnoxious the father is in the book. They make it where he's not anyway ornery, he's not mean, he's not crusty, he's just kind of this old man, and he's played brilliantly by Richard Dreyfuss, and it is fantastic. It's a good movie. I'm not going to say it's like the greatest movie ever made, but as far as the topic here, it is definitely better than its source material. Now, this one might be a little controversial, but I'm going to also add Jurassic Park into this. Now, I won't, again, I want to specifically say that Richard Crichton is a brilliant author. I've read multiple of his books, including Jurassic Park and The Lost World, and I enjoyed them. My problem with Jurassic Park is that it is way too scientific. In some places, he goes into the anatomy of dinosaurs, and that gets old really, really quickly. Not to mention, there's a lot of subplots in the novel that get kind of confusing at times. It kind of bogs down the main arc. So Steven Spielberg, when he makes Jurassic Park, he just decided to focus on the main arc, the park being shut down, and in my opinion, the book is eclipsed by the movie. The movie is fantastic. It's one of the great classics of the 90s. I have a good time watching it. I'll even rewatch Jurassic Park and The Lost World. Those two films still hold up to this day. What's interesting is later filmmakers with Jurassic Park 3 and then also the Jurassic World series, they actually took some of the subplots that were left out of the main movie but were in the book. So for instance, in Jurassic Park 3, they get lost in a pterodactyl cage. That's not in the Steven Spielberg movie, but it is in Jurassic Park 3. I had a great time with the film, and I think it is fantastic. Okay, so this one causes a lot of debate when you mention it. This is The Shining. Now, I have read a lot of Stephen King. I have read a ton of his books, including The Shining. And as much as he would hate this, me being one of his readers, obviously, the movie is better. The book, sort of like the Jurassic Park problem, is Stephen King doesn't really always know how to end his books. So he builds up all of these subplots, and then it feels like the ending is very, very rushed. It just all comes together, crashing down at the end. And I kind of felt that way about The Shining. But Stanley Kubrick took that concept and I think elevated it. I think he did an excellent job of turning a true horror film into it. I think that it is spooky. I still get jump scares when I rewatch it. And yes, I go back and rewatch my favorite films all the time. And he is just, as far as in film, I'm specifying a better storyteller. Because I know Stephen King later he had another filmmaker do more like a direct adaptation of the novel because Stanley Kubrick cut a ton of stuff out. He combined things, he combined certain characters. And also, one of the things that really bothered Stephen King was he made the dad sort of the enemy from the beginning of the film, where in the book, the dad's descent is a lot slower, a lot slower. In fact, at one point in the novel, spoiler alert, he actually disfigures his face in a moment of lucidity as the house is trying to possess him so that he will intentionally frighten his son so the son will know to run away from him. I actually kind of liked that the main character, Jack, he is set up to be the bad guy from the beginning. I kind of like that better. I like to know who to root for and who not to root for early on, and Kubrick does deliver in that manner. Okay, so this is probably even more controversial than Jurassic Park and The Shining combined. Tales of Earthsea. That's right, Ursula K. Le Guin. She did this series called the Earthsea series. It begins with Wizards of the Earthsea, and it follows this wizard called Sparrowhawk as he goes on adventures and he slowly rises to be kind of the head wizard of Earthsea. Years later, after the series was completed, Studio Ghibli decided to adapt it, but instead of doing a direct adaptation of The Wizard of Earthsea or one of the other books, they decided to take elements from all of the books and kind of make like a pseudo or spiritual successor to the book series. So it doesn't start off with Sparrowhawk being young and the head wizard. He's already older, he's already more experienced, and he's already the head wizard. And basically what happens is this young prince, he attempts to slay his father and manages to steal his magic sword. And he's doing this because there's this evil wizard who's kind of tampering with the laws of magic in Earthsea. And that's also why Sparrowhawk is coming to this region because he senses something is off. The author of the Earthsea series, she is notorious for hating all adaptations of her books. Kind of like Stephen King, although he's more 60-40, 60% hates them, 40% loves them. She always hates them. I've never read once where she said, "Oh, I like this adaptation," or "I didn't like." She's kind of like the writer of Mary Poppins. She didn't like any of the adaptations of her works except for a stage play which she co-wrote. With this stuff, she hated everything, and she especially didn't like Tales of Earthseas. She basically said that she thought that the director of that film, who I think was also the writer, that he basically took it and put his own spin on it, that it wasn't originally her story. And I can appreciate that, but I have to say, I didn't get past Wizards of Earthsea. I didn't read the rest of the books in the series. Once I did that first book, I was one and done. I had had enough. It just didn't impress me as a fantasy story, as anything that was noteworthy. I'm not saying it was terrible. I've certainly read worse fantasy books than Wizards of Earthsea. I'm just saying Studio Ghibli took it and elevated, in my opinion, made it better. She should have endorsed the movie. In fact, it's one of my favorite Studio Ghibli films, and I've seen almost all of them. I'm a big animation enthusiast, as you all know. I enjoyed it a lot more, and I hate to say that. Now, again, I want to stress that with the exception of The Prestige, the rest of the books that I mentioned, I still think are good books, but I just think that their movies were better. They weren't lost in adaptation. Let me know in the comments. Do you have any suggestions in this, or do you disagree with any of the ones I talked about? I would love to know that because this conversation has always fascinated me. If you liked that video, be sure to give it a like, share it out to all your friends, leave me a comment, tell me what you think, and subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, ring that little bell so you get notifications when I post a new vidcast, and consider becoming a channel member. Head on over to my website, StudioJakeMedia.com. There are no ads, and you can sign up for free with your email address. I post reviews and commentary for all things pop culture, so definitely check that out. If you want to support the channel, head on over to my locals community. The link's in the description. You can sign up for a monthly subscription, or you can send me tips based on the articles I post there, including some exclusive ones. If you really want to support me, I have books. I have a ton of books here. I've got the supernatural thriller Cacophony, the high fantasy Sword and Sorcery series, The Seven Royals, and of course, my latest novella, Blessed Child. You can pick one or all of them up on Amazon.com. Get them, leave me a 5-star review. It really helps out small indie creators like myself. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time, right here on Studio Jake.